Hello, this is my review impressions of the first edition of Vampire the Masquerade, a role-playing game, a storytelling game, of personal horror from White Wolf. This bad boy came out in 1991, and like all their first editions, it is in it's softback, second and revised, and now the V20, the 20th anniversary stuff are hardback, but this one is softback. By Mark Reinhagen. This is really the one that kind of kicked everything off. It set up the naming convention. It set up really the storyteller system and fleshed that out. It set up the world of darkness, the themes of horror, the way that these stories could be told. At the time, Dungeons and Dragons was the most popular role-playing game. Game of elves and dwarves and dragons, and you're going on magical quests, or you're going on quests casting magic spells and gaining magical artifacts. And this one was more introspective, and it really... I came in on the revised edition, and I just fell in love with the meta plot and the artwork and the themes involved in this. So, like all White Wolf products and books, it starts off with some prose with a brief story. The idea behind this is that this is written from Vlad Tepes, and he explains the origin of kindred, synonymous to vampire. The origin of them, in this case, is from Cain. God cursed Cain with vampirism. He was the first vampire, and throughout history, he's embraced or made new childer or new vampires under him. And that's kind of their history. Their history is contained within an ancient text known as the Book of Nod, but this book is fragmented. There's no full, complete version of it, so their history is kind of aloof. And in some instances, Cain might not be real, but in this book, it's presented as it is. A lot of black and white. The whole book is black and white, but Bradstreet really did a lot of artwork for this. The Masquerade. So the idea behind this is that there was a time, and it's explored in some later White Wolf products, that vampires just thrived on their power and used their position and the fact that they were better than their humans to control them, but humans eventually rose up and kind of put them on the ropes, hence the need for a masquerade. They hide themselves now. They have to control the media, they have to control humans, they have to be careful. That's the idea behind this. Childer, embracing new children and what they mean to vampiric society. The nature of vampires, this is kind of fun. He basically goes off on, hey, motion pictures aren't really true. Some of it is, and we can use that to our advantage. Again, thinking of the Masquerade, if people think we can't enter rooms without being invited, or if people think that for some reason we're not going to show up on a mirror, we can use that to our advantage to like better integrate with society. Crosses, holy water, and other things can be safely ignored. It's all about the faith within them. The item itself is meaningless. Garlic does nothing but smell bad. Running water, really? We can't cross over water. The embrace kind of outlines what it is, how you become a vampire. So a vampire will drain you completely of blood, and right before you die, he'll inject you with some of his blood or let you drink a few drops of his blood, and that will change you into a vampire. The anatomy of a vampire, they don't need to breathe, they don't need to stay warm, they don't have to eat, they don't have to consume things. They don't care about sex or food or relationships or anything like that anymore. All they care about is blood. All that vampires care about is blood. And this represents kind of the beast and the madness. So on one hand, you want to retain your humanity, otherwise you completely become bestial. But on the other hand, you are fighting with that beast within you that just wants to rip and tear and feed and consume and doesn't care about trying to keep this facade of humanity going. Time for immortals, the world of a vampire, kind of the political structure, the clans, the Camarilla, which enforces the Masquerade. Diablerie, consuming another vampire and killing them through like draining their blood, which is heavily looked down upon. Chapter 1, or Book 1, The Becoming, more great art. Introduction to role-playing games, what they are, what a storyteller is, who the players are, do you win and lose, can you use playing aids, live action stuff. This is handy for players to reference as it brings up some of the things they'll need to keep in mind, the becoming a vampire, the hunger within you, some of the weaknesses, some of the powers you have, and again, some of the misconceptions regarding that. Book of Nod, here's one fragment of that historical text. The rules, so Storyteller game, this role-playing game uses the Storyteller system, and in that system it's a dice pool. You have a dot on your character, which we'll get to a character sheet in the next page. Each dot on your character sheet represents one dice that you can roll. And when you roll dice, you're looking for a number that the storyteller will give you. You're looking to get that number or higher. So the more dice you have, the better your chances of getting that number. Here, difficulty numbers and degrees of success. So the storyteller has kind of two axes to go off of. On the one hand, they can obviously raise or lower the number you need to hit on that dice, with 6 being the average, so 50-50 on a 10-sided die. And then finally, they can change the degrees of success, or the number of successes you need to achieve something. Hey, this is a very menial task. You need to get a 3 on a 10-sided die, and you only need one of them. Or, hey, this is much more complex. You're trying to scale this huge tower. Let's make that a difficulty of 8 or 9, and we're going to require you to get 4 successes to completely scale that, for instance. The rule of 1, if a 1 is rolled on a 10-sided die, it will negate one of your successes, which could lead to a botch in which you have more 1s than successes. Character sheet, everything is represented by these dots. I find this a very intuitive and easy system to understand for people who've never played a role-playing game before to people who are familiar with other systems. It actually makes a lot of sense to me. How many dots do I have in this? That's how many dice I roll. As opposed to Dungeons & Dragons, for instance. Okay, you have a characteristic from, or an attribute from 6 to 20, and within those numbers there's an attribute bonus, and you really only care about the attribute bonus and not the actual flat number. And then from that number you have a proficiency bonus that you add to all your checks. Like, hey, how many dots do you have here? That's how many dice you roll. This is the number you need. Roll it. It's very simple and easy. Typically, you'll roll, or the storyteller will ask for an attribute and an ability to do something. Hey, use your perception and alertness to see if someone's going to jump out at you. Use your strength and brawl to see if you can hold on to that person. Give me a dexterity and stealth roll. Manipulation and subterfuge, your advantages and disciplines, which we'll get to in a second. Automatic success, if you have more dice in your pool than the difficulty, you don't need to roll. Just kind of speeds up gameplay here. Goes into extended actions, resisted actions, and teamwork. Essentially, if you're going to be researching something or running for an extended period of time, you'll need to make an extended roll in which you'll need to obtain a certain number of successes to finally finish that. Resisted roll is basically 2 people rolling against each other, shadowing or fighting someone. Extended and resisted in arm wrestling. Hey, one of us needs to get 5 successes to fully move the other person, and we're trying to combat our strength against each other. And that's kind of it. Symbol, extended rolls, resisted rolls, and an extended and resisted roll. the character. And the way that now Onyx Path, but storytelling games handle their character creation is you come up with a concept. D&D, you start with race, and then you go to class, and then now I think you have your background. But storytelling games ask you to come up with a concept. They're less concerned with the actual stats on your character sheet and more concerned with who is that character, and let's go through that character. So I'm just a working Joe. I'm a kid. I'm a gang member. I'm a musician. I'm a punk. I'm a reporter. I'm a occultic investigator, for instance. Based on that concept, that will give you a handy idea of what would my character be good at? Where should I kind of put my dots? What clan would go well with that? What clan would not go well with that? And maybe that's an interesting archetype to go through. But you pick your concept. You just come up with an idea for it. And then you have the clans. And in this case, there's the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There's 8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Oh, right. 7 plus the caitiff, the caitiff. There's 7 clans in the Camarilla, and this last one is you don't have a clan. You're an outcast. You're a runt. You pick your nature and demeanor, which is going to determine who your character is on the inside and who your character presents themselves as to other people, with some handy archetypes here that you can use. Again, we haven't put dots in anything. We've just thought through who would our character be, what kind of character would they be. Then we finally start choosing our attributes. And I can go into that in more depth once I see a character sheet again. But you pick your attributes, which one is going to be my primary, secondary, and tertiary one. Would I be more mental than physical? Would I be more social than mental? And then based on which one you've chosen as your primary, you get a certain allotment of dice. The secondary one gets less, and the physical one gets less. So with those dots, you fill out your stats here. Likewise, you do the same for your abilities. Hey, my character went to school, so I think he'd favor knowledge over talents, things that he'd have learned kind of on the streets and through living. Hey, my character has a lot of hobbies, and he kind of bounces around a lot, so he's very skillful, but he didn't spend any time studying stuff, so he's less knowledgeable. And the primary one gets more dots, secondary one gets less so, and your tertiary one gets less so, and you kind of build these out as well. Your advantages, your disciplines are your vampiric powers. Your backgrounds are things which we'll get to in a second when I can see them. And your virtues represent how your character behaves themselves. For gameplay purposes, this kind of comes up with frenzy rolls a lot, but the disciplines and backgrounds you can get: disciplines, animalism, auspex, celerity, dominate, fortitude, obfuscate, potence, presence, protean, and thaumaturgy. Backgrounds: do you have allies, contacts within the mortal world? How famous were you? Generation: what tier of vampire are you? How close are you to Cain? Do you have a herd of vessels you can feed from? How much money do you have under resources? Last touches are your humanity, your willpower, and your blood pool, and then just various other things. And then you have some freebie points here to kind of flesh out your character a little more, put some stats where they need to be, unlock some other things, and that's your character sheet. Here's an example of it. Looking ahead, explanation of the Chronicle, the Prelude, which is human to vampire. I actually enjoy not letting my players pick their clan. There's definitely a place for hey, this is the clan, and we're going to start where I'm already vampiric after a couple years. But I do find it a lot more fun to do a prelude with everyone to tell me who your character is, tell me who your human is before we try to layer on the vampiric side of it. I think that makes the loss of the human side more potent, and it leads to a better story if people actually think of relationships and brothers and the jobs they have and the family lives they lead and the things they do and the hobbies they have, and then stripping that away from them. You can't work at a bank anymore. You can't go in 8 to 5 because sunlight will burn you. How are you going to maintain that you're a famous actor? How are you going to be famous? How are you going to be known? And how can you hide who you are now that you're a vampire? Different ways that you can integrate this into your story. Stalked, the actual attack, the release from the vampire to being autonomous. And this kind of goes through when a vampire embraces you or makes you a vampire, there's a reason behind that. There's a reason they needed you. They don't just embrace because they think it'll be fun. No, they need to maintain the masquerade, and there's not enough blood to go around. So you have to have something that is enticing or useful, and someone will embrace you for that. And then eventually they'll kind of release you from their dominance, their parentalness over you. That's not a word. The traditions that must be enforced. An example of play here, the hunger. Traits. Now we're going to get into the clan. A brief section on specialties. You can specialize in stuff and get extra dice or lower the difficulty for stuff. The clans available are the Bruja, kind of the rebels. The Gangrel are outsiders. They're bestial. They look like animals. They can infuse themselves with the earth. And I really enjoy the stereotypes section here, where the Bruja will give a sentence about the other clans. The Nosferatu, they're rejected unjustly because of how they look. We are the only ones who respect them despite their bestiality. The Ventru, these contemptible, conniving politicians, are hypocrites of the highest degree. And each clan will kind of talk about the others. But it has a stereotypical appearance, a stereotypical haven, a background, what they look for, their disciplines, and the weakness. So each clan has a weakness associated with it. Bruja fall into frenzies more often. The Gangrel, when they do frenzy, actually develop animalistic traits. They get furry, they get claws for hands, for instance. The Malkavians, the Nosferatu, the Toreador, the Tremere, and the Ventru. The Malkavians are these seers that know the answers to all the questions, and it broke their mind. The Nosferatu are hideous and disfigured, and they thrive in sewers. They're information brokers because they can't really be social. They kind of slink in the shadows. The Toreador are obsessed with art. They're the degenerates. They care about, they want to remain, they don't want to remain human, but they want to retain that humanity. They think art and emotions and experiences are what keeps someone human, and their weakness is in this state, in this vampiric state, that they can totally lose themselves within a beautiful piece of art or an enticing piece of music. They'll literally just stay transfixed staring at that piece of artwork. The Tremere are warlocks. They're kind of this occultic organization that uses the power of blood to manipulate and cast spells, which is really interesting. The Ventru are about power and control. They kind of lead the Camarilla and enforce the Camarilla. And they're the CEOs, they're the corporate takeovers, they handle the political side of things more. That's their stereotype. And then the Kaitif, the Caitiff, that are cast-offs, they can gain a discipline from any of the classes, but they're seen as the redheads, less than. No one takes them seriously. A full breakdown of the different archetypes, explaining them. Again, this is for character creation. Explanation of all the physical attributes, mental attributes, social attributes, and then hey, from 1 dot on alertness, this is what you'd be good at. 5 dots, you notice everything that goes on around you. For brawling at 1 dot, you know what to do, but you haven't had much experience. At 5 dots, you're a Golden Glove boxing champion. And it breaks down all of the different attributes and abilities. Finally, the disciplines that the clans have access to. Animalism is you communicating with animals, controlling animals. Auspex, this allows you to see things that others can't see. You can see auras, you can tether yourself. I think at a certain point you get, you have telepathy, astral projection. You can lose yourself into this astral space. Celerity allows you to move faster than any human can possibly move. Dominate, you control others that are of lower generation than you or humans. You're stronger, not stronger, your stamina is higher than other humans or other vampires. You can soak up more damage. You're more hardy. Obfuscate is what the word is. You vanish, you hide. Potence, you're stronger than other vampires or other humans. Your presence is different than dominate. Dominate, you're commanding someone to follow you. Presence is there's just something about you that attracts people to you, that people lose themselves in you. People want to be your friend rather than you commanding them to be. Protean, this allows you to change into a wolf or into mists or into a bat. Thaumaturgy has a much larger section on rituals, the different paths, the different spells that you can cast. It's not very fleshed out here. The player's handbook has a lot more, but this is one of the harder things in here, is to deal with the different rituals that can be cast, the different paths that can be followed. Within this book, it's super simple because there's not much at all. There's just one path that they can do, but in the player's handbook, it's basically this huge tree of different ways that they can go through. Backgrounds, allies, contacts, the virtues, conscience, self-control, courage, your humanity, willpower, blood pool, and finally health. Using your experience, what you can increase and how. You can't increase certain things. You can only increase them. You can't increase everything through experience. You can increase certain things through role-playing. Hey, your character made a deal with someone. Okay, they're a new contact for you. How willpower and blood pool are used throughout gameplay. How you kind of use willpower, how you gain blood by feeding, injuries, and how that affects your dice pools and what that means for you actually dying, frenzy, losing yourself to the beast, succumbing to the beast. How to roleplay that when you essentially don't have control of your character anymore. You've succumbed, and for the remainder of that scene, you've lost yourself. How do you roleplay that to where it means your character is doing something bad, but your character isn't completely off the deep end? Like, there's a fine line to toe. The storyteller wants you to completely drain this human of blood as you've frenzied, and you know that's going to cause some downside to your character, so you kind of role play that back and forth. The derangements your character can have, madness, rage, terror derangements, vengeance, fear of vampires. You could have amnesia. You could live in fantasy. You could have multiple personalities. Humanity, and explaining again how important it is for you to retain that humanity, what causes you to lose your humanity. Golconda is the state of enlightenment that certain vampires want to achieve to free themselves of the call of the beast. Diablerie, the blood bond, in which you feed someone your blood 3 times and they become bound to you. They have to listen to you. They always listen to your orders. Embracing, drama. This is kind of for the storyteller. Scenes, turns, action scenes, organizing that. Here's some examples of simple roles for you to understand. Here's the different systems that are involved: physical, climbing, feats of strength, shadowing, swimming. Combat is interesting in this, in that there is no initiative roll. You roll Dex plus Brawl, and whoever achieves more successes is basically who gets to deal damage that round. I actually think it makes a lot more sense than the initiative tracker. It's a little weird. Okay, what do you do? What do you do? What do you do? What do you do? A real fight is much more fluid and more dynamic than that. There's no turns. But it can lead to situations where, hey, I am not trained in dexterity or brawl, and I never get the chance to go because the other character is just stronger than me and they overpower me, which would, in my head, be what a real fight is like. You don't get a turn to think through and decide what you want to do. It's kind of immediate. Rules for firefights, cover, hiding, sample weapons here. Social, seducing, stealing things, performances, just examples of the systems. This is actually an entirely optional chapter. I think at the beginning it says, hey, you don't have to use these if you don't want to, if you think you can do it better or faster with just the attribute and abilities. But here's the way that we've used these that you can pull from. A nice example of play which kind of ties things together and lets you walk through it and understand how things work. The setting, it's a gothic punk world. It is our world but darker, and this explains that to you. This explains what a neonate is, what an anarch, an ancilla, an elder, a Methuselah. What are the words that vampires use? What is a prince? What's the importance of that? What are the traditions? Oddly enough, in this one, the first and fifth are swapped. The fifth tradition is the Masquerade, and the first tradition is Domain. And all other editions, these are flipped. So the very first tradition to honor is the Masquerade. But just the setting, what is the world like here? Acceptance, domain, becoming, accounting, secrecy. The namings, they did not stick to this naming after this edition at all. The blood hunt, the different bloodlines, some examples of those. What is the Camarilla, conclave, the inner circle of that? The Sabbat, who's against the Camarilla, who doesn't understand why do we need to hide ourselves? We're obviously superior to humans. Let's control them. And they have cities that they control, and it's overrun. Detroit, Toronto, Montreal, New York, in this case, are Sabbat cities. They're kind of taken over. There's no real description of them here. It's just kind of this anonymous threat. Hey, there are some places that don't cling to the Masquerade, and those are bad places. Generations, how removed are you from Cain? You start at 13th, and you can work your way up, although it's not the nature of the vampire role-playing game isn't to increase like your character's generation as much as it is to explore the story. Antagonists that you can use, governments. There's even stat blocks here for things. Inquisition are hunters after you. The Arcanum. Werewolves. The werewolves are mentioned, but Werewolf the Apocalypse wasn't released yet, so they're not fully fleshed out, but they are mentioned here. Magi are mentioned here. Lexicon, which is helpful. I enjoy these. I enjoy reading about the setting and the world, and I like using these terms in the game to better, confer that setting or that theme. A Chronicle. This one is, what is this one? Forged in Steel. Is that one this is? Basically, it kind of explains how to create your own chronicle, what are some things that you can, Forged in Steel is the sample one they have. What are some things you can think of? What are some ideas you can incorporate? What kind of setting and characters do you want involved? This is the Forged in Steel sample where Modius is the prince of a city, Gary, Indiana, connected to Chicago, and how they're at war with each other. And it kind of goes through the different characters, their backgrounds, what their motivations are, and allows you to pick this up and run with it. Antagonists are integrated here. And it's interesting, there's hunters, like mortal hunters that are wanting to kill you. They know about vampires and their job in life is to kill you. But if you killed Sullivan, for instance, the other hunters would only be reaffirmed that there's a vampire in that city or in that area, and that would just bring them down on you harder. So the prince or the head vampire will usually say, hey, you don't fuck with hunters. Yes, they're out to kill you, but you're on your own. You need to lead them away somehow. You can't raise a finger on them. That will only make them more alert and bring more of them down here. A section for a storyteller, keeping the momentum up, actually running the game, do's and don'ts, keeping the suspense, and explaining how to play a horror type game, because it is different than Dungeons and Dragons. It is different than a lot of other role-playing games. There's darker themes, darker moods that are involved here. I actually ran out of space, so picking this up, story concepts, some sample. You can have an adventure one, a tragedy, some intrigue, vendetta, romance, urban nightmare. Baptism by Fire is a sample story that they have for you to pick up and run with. And it uses Modius and the characters introduced here, kind of allowing you to pick up and then start. Epilogue, the release, our last bit of prose here, last words, a character sheet for you, an index, and some upcoming vampire products. Ashes to Ashes. I have all of these, and I'll be going through, well, I did have Who's Who. I gave that one away. But yeah, I think this is a great game. It is a little rough around the edges. There's obviously typos, and the actual wording isn't as nice as it could be. The layout isn't as nice as it could be, but for the first edition of a role-playing game, it revolutionized role-playing and what that meant. This is probably my favorite role-playing game to run. I've only played it maybe once or twice. I run it a lot more. But I just enjoy, I prefer more introspective games. I prefer more self-discovery type games. Playing D&D, playing Numenera, those are great. Those are very fun settings, but I much prefer to do long chronicles within a White Wolf, whatever it may be, within a White Wolf or Onyx Path book. Numenera is fun and totally intrigued me and got me revitalized back when that came out, got me reinvigorated in role-playing. But truly, this is the one I keep coming back. Not the first edition, but this is the one I keep coming back to. The setting, the meta plot, the storylines, the intrigue, the loss associated with becoming a vampire is something that there's a lot of room there, something with which you can tell great stories with. A lot of people, when they first start role-playing, they might gravitate towards Pathfinder or Dungeons and Dragons if they're, older, when that was the only thing out. Now it's D&D 5th edition and Pathfinder, Starfinder, some other things out there. And those stories typically involve your character just gaining strength and going on adventures and solving magic riddles, Temple of Elemental Evil, Curse of Strahd. I like Curse of Strahd. Lost Mines of Phandelver, Storm King's Thunder. Like, your character goes out and explores the world and kills goblins and monsters and forges alliances and gets stronger. Whereas Vampire and a lot of White Wolf and Onyx Path games are less about that. There's no swords, there's no magic spell. Well, more or less. It's about you and your character and experiencing that character grow and change and develop, and seeing the world manipulate them, trying to fight that back, trying to retain your humanity in a world that constantly wants to strip that away from you. And I think this is a great role-playing game. I hope to run it for some of you guys. I actually do like a lot of things about the first edition, namely the combat. I do actually think it's more visceral and brutal, and I do like that combat is a little... it's more brutal in this one. The wounds are much more significant here than the other ones. Yeah, that is just a brief, not very brief, my look through of Vampire the Masquerade First Edition. Thank you very much for watching. I appreciate it.